Okay, thank you everyone for joining us for IGI Global's first 2018 webinar. Is it time to banish the blacklist? A practical guide to combating predatory publishing, featuring Dr. Jeremy Horne of the International Institute of Informatics and Systemics. While everyone's getting settled in, I would like to take this time to tell everyone a little bit about IGI Global. Okay, so IGI Global has been a leading academic publisher for 30 years, with an ever-expanding portfolio of 4,000 reference books, over 175 highly indexed journals, and a broad collection of InfoSci databases. IGI Global is committed to providing the highest quality publications, excellent service, and a steadfast pledge to the research community and underrepresented research, publishing in 11 different subjects, including business and management, computer science and information technology, education, engineering, environmental, agricultural, and physical science, government and law, library and information science, media and communication, medical, healthcare and life sciences, security and forensics, and social sciences. Our presenters' research, along with thousands of other resources, are available in print and electronic format on IGI Global's online bookstore. Those who order directly from IGI Global through our online bookstore will receive a 20% discount. Additionally, all of IGI Global's publications are available as a part of IGI Global's award-winning InfoSci database collection and through Gobi Library Solutions and Oasis, and on preferred platforms, including EBSCOhost and ProQuest. Today's webinar will be recorded, and all attendees will be sent a recording of the presentation after the webinar. Also, be sure to stay till the end of the presentation for a special giveaway for all attendees. Additionally, attendees will have an opportunity to participate in a live Q&A session with Dr. Horne at the end of the presentation. You can enter questions using the chat feature located at the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to type in questions as we go, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. So now I would like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Jeremy Horne. Dr. Horne is President Emeritus of the Southwest Area Meeting Division of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. His professional associations, past and present, include the International Institute for Informatics and Systemics, the International Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, and the Bioelectromagnetic Society. Currently, he serves as a science advisor and curriculum coordinator for the Inventors Assistance League. He received his PhD in philosophy from Florida State University in 1988, concentrating in political philosophy, logic, the history of philosophy, and philosophy of education. He holds a master's degree in political science from Southern Connecticut State University, a bachelor's from Johns Hopkins University. His research interests include peer review, logic, modeling and simulation, and consciousness studies. He is the editor of the IGI Global publication, Philosophical Perception on Logic and Order, and he's very passionate about upholding the standards of peer review and has presented at multiple conferences and events on this topic. So now we will take the time and go ahead and listen to Dr. Horne's presentation.
Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Jeremy Horne, and IGI and Carolyn Campbell and others have given me this opportunity to present a problem, and I'll get to that in a second. But I first want to thank everybody for allowing me this opportunity. The problem I'm talking about is with peer review. So I've got a presentation. I'm going to follow this, and I understand that everybody's going to be getting a copy of this presentation. And so I don't want to simply be reading from it, but I will talk around it.
Okay.
And there's a reference section at the end of the presentation. You can all consult sources and stuff like that. I start the presentation by saying, Houston, we have a problem. And I remember space age when we were sending probes and everything to the moon and so forth. I remember that there was some incident where, Houston, we have a problem. What is the problem? It's the peer review process. the peer review process is broken. Well, that's the next question would be, okay, well, what is peer review? What's that all about? And I come back and say, well, wait a minute. I have a piece of information that I have created, and I'm saying that it has value, and we'll get to that in a second. It's knowledge and so forth. The peer review means somebody outside of my circle, preferably somebody who does not know me, will look at the quality information. And they will say, okay, it's good, bad, or indifferent. And that individual hopefully is confident. They can look at it and say, yeah, this is good, it's bogus, or whatever it may be. That's the essence of peer review. Now, I'll add this, the more individuals who are peer reviewers, the better. That is, we take something, so what they do in statistics, you have samples. I take this one, this one, this one, this one, and I get an idea of what the whole is. Think of polls, voting polls. I want to know how a population in the city is going to vote. So I sample here, 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 and here, and then the more people I sample, ideally, ultimately, you poll everybody. That's what the election's all about. But the more people you sample, the better idea of what the whole looks like. So that's what peer review is. Ideally, the more peer reviewers, the better. You get a better idea of what the quality is. If you go to the dictionary definitions, and you can do it just as well as I have here, there's some definitions, they all say basically the same thing. You take a bunch of experts in the field, hopefully, and they'll look at what you've done, and then they'll say good, bad, or indifferent. The ideal way is blind review. In other words, they don't know you. And this is what we do in logic. I used to teach logic. And we used to have something called ad hominem. You don't make the argument on the person. In other words, you're a good buddy of mine. Isn't that great? No, I don't want them to know me. I don't want to know them. I want them to evaluate the piece of information independently. That's what a blind peer review basically is. And that's what we're seeking. But it's broken. What's broken about it? Well, you go through and you look at each periodical publication, whatever, and you don't find any consistency about the way these things are valued. I may be evaluating an article or piece of information on a set of criteria that's different than somebody else's. I'm not saying the criteria wouldn't be valid, but there's no way of saying, okay, the piece meets all of these criteria. We see people also trying to publish in these journals. Well, my article was rejected. I'm a good scientist, on and on and on, and I've got this discovery, blah, 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 and the editors must be biased. Well, that's true. There is that tendency in a lot of these journals that if you're not within their circles and they don't know you, they never heard of you, or whatever it is, you're not going to get anything published, even though your stuff may be sterling. So we don't know. So another thing we're going to get into is the failure to catch problems. And believe me, there are a bunch of them out there. Now, all you need to do is get on the web and take a look at something called Retraction Watch. Go in there and find out how many things articles have been retracted for various reasons. You can do the research as well as I can, but believe me, there's a lot out there, data fraud and this kind of stuff. Then there's false peer review. We see these, quote, journals out there. I'm going to pick on a couple of here. Creationism and parapsychology. All these publications out there really do look like journals. They have all the formats and everything else. They have the references and on and on and on. But you look at them closely and you look at the quality information, you find there's a lot of pseudoscience. And that's false science, stuff that really cannot be validated and on. Just follow scientific, but it kind of follow a method, but it's really not. And then we're going to get into this thing, fake journals. We'll spend more time on that in a while. Now, get into I'll give an example, and you can see this on the your presentation. It's slide number 12, titled "A Curious Problem in Reflexivity." Here's a quote that I pulled off the internet, and it's one of my favorite websites that I do not like. Brainy quote: "The first step in solving a problem is to recognize that it does exist. I ask, what's wrong here? Is it the quote? Is it the substance of the quote? Well, that's all right. Yeah, you have to recognize that there's a problem before you can solve it. That makes sense. So I call this a problem in reflexivity for the very simple reason, what is the problem here? Well, I don't know this guy Ziegler or her or whoever it is. That's again, I don't want to get to an ad hominem. I want to know where it came from. What's the source of this thing? I want to know the context, which gave rise to the quote in the first place. There may be more information there that shapes the meaning of the quote. So I go to Brainy Quote. Everyone, they have learned a lot of sites like this. I'm picking on them, but I think somebody needs to be called out for this. They don't give where the information came from. So that's the problem in itself. So the problem looks at itself. It creates its own problem, if you will. So we have an example of this. You can look at Wikipedia. Wikipedia has this all the time. And you'll see an article that is not sourced. Wikipedia's gotten pretty good in the last 10 to 15 years. You have editors, you have professional people, especially in the sciences. And they see that you have not given the references properly, they'll note it. They have editors. So, I mean, there's a lot more than most people do. So you look at the information, you're going to look at it like any other scholar and evaluate it and so on, but they have gotten a lot better. But as an example, you should see on that slide, this needs more sourcing. Where did this come from? We just talked about context. It's not simply that the problem exists. How did it occur? I have a little quote here from Hegel, but in essence, what it is that we see things through ourselves, and as we do that, we have a reinforcing feedback loop, and then yourself becomes better or worse, such as it may be. We won't get into all that, but that's kind of like what that is. I like putting that in as a philosopher. All right, so how did it all happen? If we see the background, and we kind of know that there's a problem there, but there's too much information. Now, this comes from Descartes. Again, I give the reference, and he basically said in 1632, whenever it was, that the way we understand something is by dividing it. Now, think of it. I used to do this as students. You give a piece of paper, and you tear that piece of paper up, you keep tearing it. Ultimately, you get down to something called Planck scale. Something like 6 times 10 to the minus 35 meters, and it's so small, it's sub-quantum level. So yeah, you can take all those pieces, and you can write papers on each one of these things. And so there's too much information out there, and then you have the corresponding journals. You've got more scholars doing this as well. Then we will talk about this in a second. As I said, fake journals. And then we have the journal subscriptions themselves. If you're trying to buy a subscription to Science and Nature or Cell, and the libraries even have a worse time of it. Those things are very, very expensive. Nobody can afford these things. And we get this declining school quality, the quality of students, the curriculums and stuff like that. And we have, most of these universities have publish or perish requirements. That is, a professor, whoever it may be, who wants to get promotion, tenure, whatever it may be, they have to publish a certain number of articles. I think the norm is something like about 3 every year, a book every few years, whatever it may be. But there are these requirements. You either publish, but you're just simply not there, don't get the promotion. And then we talk about the complexity of the world of the South. We'll get into that, all these in a few minutes. Peer review itself has a history. Prior to the mid-1700s, scholars would review their colleagues' works. We'll go back into Greek times. We had Aristotle commenting on Plato and Heraclitus and whoever it may be. And so you had this exchange of ideas, and you had the commentaries of, well, this idea is good, bad, or indifferent, and so forth. That was kind of a peer review. But at least you had some kind of checks on this. Okay, you're getting far out of line. But you find a lot of the exchanges in the writings. It's very informative. But we formalize the process itself. In 1752, I know the Dave Boyle Society of London and its philosophical transaction, where you actually had a reviewer assigned to the article. And then now, in the 20th century, I think starting about the 50s or something like this, then you started having the blind reviews, which I referred to earlier. That's in essence, those are the 3 basic stages. So you had the informal, the beginning of the formalization, and then the formalization. That's essentially what we started out with. Okay, let me click along here, and the next, we have also the deterioration of values. Now, this is very important, I think. It supports everything we've been doing here. The ethos, and that basically means what your core values are. We say, okay, what is this all about? Is it simply publishing a bunch of papers or books or whatever it may be based upon what is out there? Just because it's out there does not mean I really write about it. But what is your value on truth itself. That's what it is. Are you about truth? You pretty much have to be like a monk or a nun. And I used to do this, and I still do in presentation. You have to assume that attitude. It's a religious attitude. I used to say to my students, I'm very religious. No, I don't go to church, but I am very religious. What does that mean? You go to the etymology of religious, and that means to cohere the mind. I want to make sense of the world, and I want to devote my life to that. I want to devote my life to truth. And that's what you may have to make truth your religion. And I want to see what makes sense in the world, why I'm here, and everything else. I guess there was an extreme statement. It was of Socrates. He said basically, the unexamined life is not worth living. That's kind of a harsh statement. But really, what is it all about, Alfie, as they used to say in the movies? So we get into the quest for truth, but what matches it? You look at the school system. I'll give you some stats in a few minutes about that. And then again, the increasing complexity. All right, so that's what values. And you go through in the school curriculums themselves, you don't find any philosophy. You don't find a requirement, at least in the United States schools. I'm down in Mexico right now. And what they've done in the last couple of years, the Mexican school systems, they brought together the United Nations, the government, the national government, as well as all the state governments, and they put together a national curriculum. And this is UNESCO. There are many, many people involved in putting together this curriculum. It's a very complex one, but they're instituting it down here as we speak. I was tutoring somebody down here. They were going through, he was a high school graduating from high school, and they had to take a course in methodology, which means methods. How do you arrive at knowledge? Again, we'll get to that in a while too. And those are requirements. So the absence of philosophy basically contributes to the declining quality of knowledge. Then plagiarism, I'll show you some of that stuff. You would hardly believe it. I could hardly believe it when I started seeing this stuff too. The values. And then schools themselves. Now here are the stats. These are some of them. All you need to do is get on the web and go to the National Science Foundation, and there's something called the science indicators. It's you look at the knowledge report since 2014. Now here's some stats here. 50% of all the U.S. adults cannot read a book. That is beyond the 8th grade. If you can't read past the 8th grade, I'm sorry, you can't read. Okay, that's the Literacy Project Foundation. You have the National Center for Educational Statistics, the Department of Education. All these are in the references. You can look them up. Listen to this one. 26% think that the sun orbits the Earth. We haven't come out of Ptolemaic thinking. That's how bad that is. 26%. That's like flat Earth stuff. 50% think that antibiotics are effective against viruses. That's why they require a prescription up there. You don't want people running to the drugstore and getting antibiotics and then giving themselves antibiotics to something that doesn't exist. It's unbelievable, but that's the thing. 50%. 11% of young citizens cannot even locate the U.S. on the map. On and on and on and on. It's one of my favorites. But all you need to do is go to the references that I've given, National Geographic Society, and these other that I've given, like the National Science Foundation in particular, and take a look for yourself. And I think you'll agree. We have a problem, Houston. We really do. So let's go on further. So this is the kind of bedrock we're developing. So these kids graduate from high school, they get into universities. I've taught in a number of universities. There's not a lot better there. And now we get into the later levels. So this kind of gives you some of the background, some of the context of this thing. So that's what it's getting to in the schools. All right, now the complexity I was referring to is the Cartesianism, and that's the subdivision, the technology. There are two authors you might want to check out. I think you can download Tainter's book, The Collapse of Complex Societies. In other words, societies have become so complex that even the best and the brightest are having difficulty with some of this stuff. Look at artificial intelligence. Look at all the stuff that we see out there. How do you deal with these problems? And if you can't read a book past the 8th grade, can't read anything past the 8th grade, where are you? You can't think about critical thinking. You can't even think about critical thinking. You can't even think at that point. You can think, perhaps, kind of on a street level. But in terms of any academic knowledge, forget it. You're not going to get anywhere. All right. Now we get against all this stuff, what we call predatory publishing. So now we've got all this stuff churning. We've got the poor schools. We've got some of the plagiarism, some of the other stuff. We're getting to the predatory publishing. Now, information scientists, I'll make a point right at this point. I'm going to be referring not to librarians, but information scientists. And information scientists have to deal with these, quote, journals. Now, what is predatory publishing? All right, we go into, again, research. We can research it just as well as I can, and these are some of the criteria. They're claiming to be the provide peer review and on and on and on. I got an email the other day. I don't know if I can find it, but it's in a slide here. I'll show you in a second. In fact, you'll see in slide number, what is it here? I'm looking at it, 23. Now, you can't see this thing, but all you need to do is type out predatory publishing, and I'll find out where you can find out where you get more of these things. Don't get on a mailing list. Really don't. So the predatory publishers claim to do the peer review. Now, the key thing to look for is that you'll start getting this mail, this email. You don't know, you never heard of this journal, whatever it is. Normally, what will happen is they say, okay, we will publish your article. First of all, you've got to pay for it. Need to have it published. Now, there's a problem here because there are some legitimate journals that are doing this, which I think is unfortunate, but that's what happens. Okay, you pay $100, $200, X number $100 to get the thing published. But the predatory journal will come back and say, okay, we will accept the thing within 3 days. Now, there's no way you can do that. 4 days, we'll publish the articles? Hello? So you look at that. You look at the affiliations. You don't even know where they came from. You start doing the research. Never heard of this thing before. And then you'll find out that they just don't have any credibility at all. You'll see another thing. You'll see something. Let me see if I can hardly read this tight myself, and I'm sorry for putting up the slide, but again, it's just an example. IJES, whatever it may be, there are a bunch of these things. I'll show you where you can find out more information. You can sample them yourselves. But what will happen, one of these outfits will have a bunch of these journals scattered all over the map. Everything from nuclear physics to biology and everything else. How can one outfit have so many of these journals and then have the article approved within 3 days, and on and on? There are a lot of problems with these things, but these are some of the criteria. So the claiming affiliation with a non-existent organization, you have a high impact factor. They like to pump on that. That is questionable in itself. Falsely claiming to be included in various prestigious indexes. So there's some stuff there. Again, I gave some references there. You can research that yourself. And I had the slide here giving you an example. And again, sorry for the example. I know what is important about this is, first of all, okay, I'm just kind of clicking through this thing. Okay. All right. What I see is the problem is that if I'm reading a journal, and I read the journal because I want a specialist's opinion of something. I expect that individual to be competent in their field. They've researched the field, they've done all the homework, and they've done their experimentation, they've done whatever, and they're presenting me what they think, in their expert opinion, background education is like this, what the story is on something. I mean, it would be an experiment in microbiology or a physics experiment, something like that. So I'm looking at that, and I'm saying, okay, I'm taking it at face value. Now, what if information is false? What if the data is manipulated? And the problem is I rely upon that article for my research. So it's been found that X, Y, and Z. So basically, because it's found that X, Y, and Z is true, I can conclude this and this. It's a logical process. What happens if there's something wrong with the original X, Y, Z? Everything I say after that becomes contaminated. That's the problem. So I had these 3 examples that came to mind as a hall of mirrors. And I'm looking at one, I don't know if it's true or not. So I'm going back to medieval times. Somebody tells me something, it's rumor status. They have, I think, in intelligence outfits, I have these levels of information going from A to F. F is rumor, A is document, everything in between. But I don't know what that is. So it's like a show game, 3-card Monte or whatever it may be. So it's or minefields. I think those apt analogies, they really are. Now, a number of years ago, I think starting about 2000, maybe before then, there was a guy named Jeffrey Beal. A lot of people have heard of this guy. Very well-meaning. And he was information scientist, master science of library science. Now notice what I put down here in the presentation. This is slide, I think, 27. Master of science. These are information science. They're not librarians. If you got an MSLS, you got a science degree. That's why they have the S in there. And so he's not a librarian. A librarian is a clerk, somebody who kind of goes in there and does cataloging and stuff like that. But somebody who's an information scientist, and I know I've seen some of these curriculums, they're very, 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 very intense. You have to evaluate the information. You got to know where to get it. You have artificial intelligence involved in it. So you're not librarians, folks. You're information scientists. You've got MSLS. So the Beal, information scientist, University of Colorado, puts together this list. He was concerned. We all are. And we look at the quality of this stuff. Where's all this junk coming from? So he put together this list. I didn't know, started off with several hundred of these things. There are that many. There's several thousand right now, evidently. But there were no criteria. You get on Beal's list, and you were on the hit list. And I know of a friend who has an organization. He was on the hit list. There was no reason why he should have been on there. And so he was on there, and there's no way of removing yourself from the list, or if you try to, usually it doesn't work. So he gets the problem. He just gets irritated with their organization. He puts it on the list. And there was a specific example of this. There was a guy, and I talked to the office out in Clear Lake, Houston, I think it was, Journal of Financial Education. There's some kind of a typo. We all make typos. I'm blind as a bat myself, and I make them all the time. And so the article had some kind of a typo, and I talked with the one who knew of the incident. And evidently, I don't know what happened. The thing didn't get corrected, or just one area, some stupid little typo. Beal picks up on this thing and puts the journal on the hit list. But there's something unfair about that. So they started asking, people started getting hit like this. And this organization I know of personally almost collapsed as a result of it. People started asking, well, wait a minute, who is this Jeffrey Beal? I researched him out myself. And he has a few articles out there, but he doesn't have a PhD, a lot of people think. He doesn't have one. I mean, well-meaning. But who is reviewing Beal? Where did he get his credentials? He may know what he's doing in his domain, but who set him up as jury, the judge, jury, and executioner, as I say in this presentation? I think it's a legitimate question. So there are these lists. There are others out there we'll get to in a second. So the point is that what is the basis on which you judge the quality of the information, and how do you know whether it's good, bad, or indifferent? So I get to this thing, and again, it gets back to what I call the truth. What are we searching for? The truth. There are ways of doing this. I have a model here I've given in this presentation, the DIKW pyramid. That's data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. Now, there are probably other taxonomies, there are critiques, but it's a way of starting out to sort out what is out there. So I'm out at the beach, for example, and I see a bunch of rocks lying all over the place. Okay, well, I want to build something. Okay, well, I build a house and say I'm in a survival situation. So I take all these pieces out there, and we call these essentially data. Think of the zeros and ones. There are many ways of looking at this. You see the stuff scattered all over the place. They're building blocks. I started assembling them. And then I put them together in a building. Okay, now I've got the building, shelter. Now, that's information. In other words, what I see on the beach coheres. It coheres in some kind of a way, in this case, a building. The zeros and ones might be assembled into a computer program. So that's information. Now it coheres. Now, what about that? The building may be junked. It may fall over. So that's the knowledge. Does the information have quality? Does it have quality? It's the same thing as a computer program. So now we get into the wisdom is how we can use it. Now again, you can read this slide for yourself. You can do research on the DIKW pyramid. The ways you look at the pyramid, there are feedback loops. How do you separate one from the next? Now you start off, and this is what I have in this next slide, from data to wisdom. You start off, first of all, you've got to You start off with ethos. I really love truth. You've got to be religious. You've got to be the monk or the nun. And I really want truth. How do you take that data and how you transform it into information and then ultimately knowledge? You apply what we have in philosophy called epistemology. justified belief. I go out there with all my standards for research and everything else, and there are various types of epistemology. You have it historical, you have logical, and you take logic courses for this. And then you have scientific methods. You have empiricism, is by experience and by senses. So you go through courses in epistemology. How we know something, you account for where you got your assertions. I make an assertion. I don't go on some forum, and we were going through trying to set this presentation up this morning. And how do you do this? Well, I'm taking it to a forum. I don't want a forum. I don't want anybody's opinion. I want to know that it works. I want to start from something and say, I've done this, this, and this. I've arrived at my conclusion by this method. And then I can go out there and empirically, I can go out there and test it. Does it work? They were saying a number of years ago for that Y2K crisis, a guy named Jordan, I think, a Gartner group, 75% of all the software development is testing, user testing. You have in the IEEE, I used to be on the standards committee in the IEEE, International Institute for Electrical Engineers, and like that. And what it is that you go through a whole process in order to arrive at testing, and you have testing is one of them. Now I have the IEEE 12207 software development standard. You have unit tests, you have integration tests, you have systems tests. Then you have the usability testing. How much of that stuff out there is really tested? How can you go through from step one to the ultimate step and see that it does work? Have you really found out empirically does it test? Now we get ultimately to the last part. We have the feedback loops, which I refer to in the IKW pyramid. Then the wisdom, what comes out of this is the second order cybernetics, the observer as the observed. Now we have the last 15 to 20 years, the National Science Foundation started recognizing this, that we have the experimenter is just as much a part of the experiment as the experiment itself. That means you account for the bias. And all I say to people is, we know you're biased, everybody is, I am too. Be honest about the bias. Describe that bias, how it enters and stuff like that. We can account for it. I'm slanted towards certain things. So I'm slanted toward logic and a few other things like that. I admit it, but be honest about it. Don't try to be objective. There's no such thing as objectivity. Everybody's biased, admit it, but that's the point about what we were saying earlier about sampling. We all know that the biases, you take that whole range of responses, you put them together, and you say, okay, now I see what the overall picture is. Everybody's biased, but when bias balances itself off against the other, or at least your opinion is valuable. Maybe it isn't. Anyway, so that's the DIKW pyramid, and then I say the process, how you arrive from the data to the wisdom. Now, in the second order cybernetics, and again, I keep harping on this, you look at yourself in the mirror. I used to give this experiment to students, and the students, I say, you know what, you want to know what philosophy is? Look at the mirror. How do you see things? How do you see yourself? Oh, after a while, what will happen is you'll see yourself bouncing back up. You'll see yourself actually, I think, certainly psychologically, physically, you see yourself apart from that mirror looking at yourself. That's what bias is. That's the nature of it. I suggest that exercise. I understand it's an old Far Eastern exercise. Buddhists and Hindus that kind of do that. That's how you kind of start to know yourself. That's what philosophy is. Now we look at the pyramid, revisiting that pyramid. You take that information, you go in from the data, get in information, and the way you get from that information to the knowledge is justified belief. Again, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy has some very good articles on epistemology. I suggest you might want to read them as background. I put together a diagram here. Again, you can refer to your presentation on systems analysis, research that as well, how feedback loops work. This is part of the process involved in that DIKW pyramid, how those feedback works. Look, every level feeds on the other for its integrity. Again, with the second order cybernetics, we had this old philosophy problem of whether it's a duck or whether it's a rabbit. You flip that, I can't tell, I'm half blind myself, but I see that duck, and I flip it on its side, and you'll see the rabbit. Another way of looking at second order cybernetics is that feedback loop. We have the Ubus, I cannot pronounce the name. It's the hoop snake with a snake, something chasing itself. Think of an animal chasing its own tail. So you're caught within that fishbowl. That's what we call in philosophy the fishbowl problem. Everybody's in the fishbowl, and that's all we see is our own environment through ourselves. That's very important to realize that. Now, what can we do about all this? We've seen part of the problem, and I've only scratched the surface, you can only imagine. But what do we do about this stuff? You learn about it, obviously. You find out what epistemology is. You do all these things. Now, let's come to how we as information scientists and others, academicians, publishers, can do something about this. First of all, and I keep harping on this, and again, my bias is a philosopher. You have to look at your core values. Look in that mirror. Do that mirror exercise. What is a core value? It's about truth. Become the nun. Become the monk. Become that religious person and that real deep sense of religio, to cohere or bind. Value that. That is your value. Internalize that value. The philosopher by the name of Altus, you internalize the value. Live it. You have to be the living truth. Now, I'll give an example of this thing, and I do sideline writing, freelance writing, and all you need to do is go on the internet. This is one sample of a screen capture. It's a screen capture I do, and there are these freelance writing with websites, and what they do is they'll say, okay, you bid on these things. You say, okay, well, I see this project out there, you bid on it, and you find a lot of these Upworks. Go to Upwork, and you see a lot of these postings for, we want this thing written. We were looking for a contract writer to do this, that, and the other. So many times what will happen is you'll see a job posting, and you can do it just as well as I can. Here's an example. You just type in customize term paper writing services. There we go. So what happened? A lot of academics will get out there. I'm talking about PhDs, people who've taught, professors. They get roped into this stuff too. I will argue that a lot of them don't even have the basic ethos. What are you doing here? You write something and you're writing a dissertation or a term. Take a look at dissertation writing services. Another one. There are a number of websites out there that will actually say they'll sign up writers, professional writers, PhDs. The irony is they'll take their work and they'll run it through a plagiarism check. They'll ask for CVs. And on and on. There are a lot of war stories I've got with this, so you can do the research yourself, but it's out there. And there are a lot of academicians who write these term papers and dissertations out there. That's what I mean about the lack of ethos. They have no conscience. All they're looking to do is earn an extra buck. It's out there. Take the slide, do the research. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. It's alarming. It is not only unethical and total lack of ethos, it's alarming because it gets back into that knowledge quality. It's a minefield. You're laying more mines, basically. You look at the data fraud. Look at the retraction watch. Again, go back to that slide I gave you about retraction watch and research them out. You see a lot of these papers, thousands of these are being retracted. They're the peer review, the predatory journals, and we've talked about some of this stuff already. And then there's this removal of philosophy, literature, and liberal arts courses from various curriculums. Now it's all techne-oriented. And then the publisher perish stuff. We touched on that before. And it's alarming. I'm raising an alarm that we're going through this thing again, setting up this presentation. I'm seeing a lot of stuff out there, with a lot of the computer stuff out there, the lack of poor knowledge. I'm saying, hey, wait a minute, people. There's a fire burning downtown. People look around. It's burning down. You have to do something about it. I know. I have a bias. I see an alarm. I live it every day. I see this stuff going on. It's alarming. Now, what can you do about this? You're sitting there in your, quote, library, and you see students coming in. You're looking at stuff. There's too much information coming across your desk. But at least internalize not only your ethos, but you advocate alternatives to various people. If you interact with professors, hey, there are some other ways of dealing with this. For example, instead of trying to publish something, forcibly pump out a bunch of stuff that may not have any quality. There are other ways of maintaining your position. Especially if you're teaching. A teacher is not always the greatest researcher. They can take the information they have and they can convey in the classroom. What can we do? Okay. Well, I'll get to this more later. The alternative would be make yourself available for peer review, that you can check the integrity of somebody else's article. So you have a bunch of these things that you do X number of reviews a year. So rather than writing articles, be a reviewer. Work for common standards. Instead of having all these disparate ways of evaluating the integrity of an article, let's get rid of the anarchy. Let's make it more coordinated. So an article has to go through all these criteria. You monitor the journal quality out there. If you see something that you suspect is junk, research it out. And if you see something that's weird, raise the flag. Wait a minute, we have a problem here, Houston. Work with colleagues. Discuss this. Have meetings. Have regular meetings in your organization on knowledge quality. Get also familiar with critical thinking if you're not already. There are two good critical thinking sites: criticalthinking.com, criticalthinking.org, and that. I just try the combination. It's a good friend of mine, Richard Paul, out in Sonoma, California. I think it's criticalthinking.org out of Sonoma. There's a lot of materials on that. Pass on critical thinking to everybody. Just look at the information you've got. If it smells like a skunk, it probably is. Check it out. Teaching others, and then help identify what is important. Just because I can take apart a vacuum cleaner down to the last bolt doesn't mean I have to write a paper on it. And collaborate with credible publishers. I'm going to get to this in a second. Now, let's take an example of a peer review process. Now, I'm going to let my bias out of the bag right now. I started with IGI 2 or 3 years ago, writing some articles for some. They had a good friend of mine. He was an editor of a book he was putting out. He asked me to contribute an article, which I did. Now, what I started running into is that what I had to go through in order to get that passed. Now, I've written articles before for peer review publications, but this is a peer review. This is a peer reviewer's peer reviewer. Again, I know this is prejudice, and I don't mind doing this, but it stands on its own. IGI Global has this. You have an initial blind review, okay? That's common fare, okay? 2 peer reviewers, blind review, okay? Are you ready for this one? I've never heard of this before, and I've been around the block a few times, I think. I'm 73 years old, and I've taught in many universities in Britain. I'm not the most published writer in the world, but I've never heard of any publisher, journal, requiring a submission of a curriculum vitae. IGI checks them too, I found out. So if I have a degree from wherever it may be, IGI will check that. I never heard of that before. So if you go through IGI's reviewer, you have to submit your curriculum vitae. I had to do mine. Then, it's not only the peer review, they don't let that go by. They have an editorial review board. There is another review by an associate editor, and the third review. I never heard of this before. You got 3 or 4 levels of review here. I've never heard of it before, but it's good. So it's a peer reviewer's peer reviewer. What can I say about it? There it is. You can go on there's a website. I'm going to give you in a second. You can actually go to the website. It's on here, the criteria. There's a website right there. You got the presentation. Go ahead and click on it. It's an active link. You can read it for yourself. But you have the originality and on and on and on. You have the satisfactoriness of the methodology analysis, and there's a review sheet. I've got a copy of this thing. It's several pages long. It's very involved. It takes several hours to go through a peer review. I've done several of these myself, and you have to have a checklist. So check it out literally, and there's a standard right there. So I'll come back to that standard later. There's a importance of truth. There's an analogy of the cave allegory of Plato's cave in the 7th book of the Republic. The whole idea of truth. We're in a cave, all we're seeing is illusions like this, and so as soon as the people walk outside, they're chained to a wall, watching these shadows on the wall. We'll see everybody, I think, has heard the allegory. They walk outside the cave, and then the sun shines on the truth. We have the more modern version of the Enlightenment, the sun shining out there on the truth. This goes through some of the summary of what we do. Recognize, you know how to recognize knowledge. We've gone through that. Knowledge quality builds on itself. and I've given a slide here. You look at the feedback loops, and if it's good knowledge, it feeds into the next stage of the research. People depend upon that. You build on that. It's a building process. That's all that is. But you got to recognize that there's a problem first before you start on this quest. You have to have the will to act. Do I really care about doing something about it? You don't go along to get along. You say, there's a problem here, Houston. Hello? So that's something we ran into. Now, study the paradigms. Now, getting back to the IGI peer review process, look at this. I'm not going to try to go over this thing. This is extensive. It'll take you half an hour just to read the material. There's your link. There's a checklist. It's a flow chart. I've never seen anything like this. I said I've read. And all you need to do is go to Elsevier and some of the others, and go to nature. So I was not to brag, but I was the Southwest Division, it's called SWARM, Southwest Area Regional Meeting of the American Association of Advancement of Science. I was the president for a year, and I've gone through that process. Science doesn't have it. This is science. This is supposed to be a sterling journal. Science doesn't have this stuff. Nature, they don't have the process like this. Again, check it out. I never heard of a thing like this before. Another thing about it, I'm going to put an advertisement. I don't mind advertising for this stuff. You see what's happened with IGI. What they do, it's a real cross-disciplinary stuff. All you need to do is go to the website and look at the hundreds of journals. And yet, be careful about that. But there's other, because a lot of the fake ones do this. This is not fake. You go through the journals, open them up, and you see the peer review process. They all have to, every one of these hundreds and hundreds, but thousands of academics have to go through the same process. And I was an editor of a logic book that was put out late. I really appreciate Carol advertising for me. I don't mind saying this, but I had to do it. It was an agonizing process. It took a year to get that book out. But it's extensive. It's a pain in the neck sometimes, but believe me, what comes out of it, you've got quality. Now, I'm kind of bouncing around here. I'm half blind. Now, what I propose is a Knowledge Quality Institute. Now, I used to be on the standards committee. It was a fiber optic technical advisory group for the IEEE. I've kind of made reference to that before, 802.8. The whole idea of a Knowledge Quality Institute would be, okay, you have a regularized peer review process. Some of the problems that I've mentioned before, promote knowledge quality. You can read it as well as I can. You have regular meetings. And you can go to the IEEE as a model, take a look at their standards groups and compare it to this. It would follow the same idea. You have a journal of knowledge quality. In itself would be a gold standard. And again, it's coordinated. I put some of the standards organizations up here. You can research them as well as I can. So that's what you do. You have this Knowledge Quality Institute. Now, where would I start? Guess what? You go back to the previous slides and you look at that process. It's the damnest process I've ever seen in my life. You take that, you build on that. Maybe I don't know how you can improve it, but it's so you have 4 levels of review. I don't know how you can improve on that. I mean, but you use that as a building block. What I'm asking is that people look at this. If you're interested in this Knowledge Quality Institute, go ahead and email me and we can help coordinate this thing. It's undergoing its own peer review in-house. When we get this thing off the ground, I think this would be a kernel of a start. We can find out how we can improve knowledge quality. After all, this is what it's all about. Because we don't start looking at what's going on in academia. We have all you need to do. You can get some of the problems I've discussed about the fake journals and the altered dissertations being written by unethical academicians and on and on and on. If we don't start grappling this problem right now, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. So now we have this issue with a peer review. We know what the drill is. You know about the lists. You know about the stuff that's out there. My question to you all is, what are we going to do about this? Let's do something about it. So that's what I had to say. That's my crank for the day. Again, I really want to thank IGI, Carolyn, and everybody else for the patience for listening to me about this. And I think we all can work together to do something about this. So right now, I'm going to turn it back over to IGI and the others and see if there are any questions. Okay? Thank you all very much, and I'll entertain any questions that you've got. Hello, everybody.
Okay, I apologize that the presentation skipped around on us here. You'll just bear with me. Okay, so at this time, we're going to go ahead and open it up for any questions you may have for Dr. Horne. If you could just go ahead, I did see we did have a few come in while he was presenting. So just go ahead and use the chat feature and the GoToWebinar control panel for any questions. Okay, and it looks like we did have a few questions. So our first question for you, Dr. Horne, what is the main criteria to identify at a glance a fake journal and an excellent journal?
Well, I think the first thing you have to look at is if you if you don't want to consult a list or whatever, and I'm suspicious of lists sometimes, is to ask some very common sense questions. The first thing, and I'm looking at one right here. I thought I pulled this example up. The claim is that I'm looking at the called packed journals. Okay, your submission deadline the 8th of February 2018. Now you go through all the indices and stuff like this, and you start looking at this online publication within 8 to 9 days. Now most of these fake journals will have something like this. That's a red flag. Now, it doesn't mean necessarily they don't have a panel of good quality peer reviewers, but that right there should raise suspicions. How can anybody turn an article around in just a few days, especially if it's of a technological or other complex nature? That's the first thing. The second thing is that I look at Beal's list, and I think there are some red flag indicators there too. I'm not saying that I would rely on Beal's list, but if it's on the list, you should ask the question, well, why would he put it on the list? That's the second indicator. The third thing is to start looking at the articles themselves and look at the quality. And again, you have to be a specialist in the area perhaps, but that is another way of looking at or a way of evaluating these journals. This is why I come back to this Knowledge Quality Institute, because not everybody is going to be equipped to be able to look at the journal, let alone go through all the articles and evaluate each one. The journal's integrity often relies upon the quality of the articles themselves. Let's say if I started a journal tomorrow and I had every qualified writer putting articles in and stuff like this, and it's not known anywhere, how would you be able to evaluate that journal? And that gets back to my two main things, is basically the Knowledge Quality Institute as well as one's personal inventory of evaluation of information to see whether there's knowledge that gets into the epistemology, philosophy, and stuff like that. That's the way I would approach this. But I think that, again, that Knowledge Quality Institute would be a step forward to helping people out in evaluating these journals.
Okay. And then another great question is, what is the best way to mentor new faculty and graduate students about predatory publishing?
All right, it's the same type of a thing. You give them the tools. And in fact, it was very interesting that you raised that question, because I think it was in the Chronicle of Higher Education or some other source I saw in the last few days. The same kind of question almost exactly was asked. How do I evaluate these things? Again, I think it gets back, it's a systemic problem, or that you have to have this epistemology and critical thinking and that groundwork and evaluating sources. Like you go way back, I mean, I was going through X number of decades ago. Okay, well, what's the date of the information? Who was doing it? How did they get the information? On and on and on. Some basic tools. In other words, I'm giving you a fishing net or a pole and so forth to be able to fish. I don't give you the fish. I give you the tools to be able to evaluate that. I think also working with colleagues, you sort of have an in-house peer review in a way that, okay, collectively you look at it and you say, there's something wrong with this journal, like some of the things I just mentioned. So you take that student through the process, and I emphasize the word process. You say, okay, to the student, you give them the epistemology, the philosophy, let alone the background information in the subject area itself. Give them the tools to be able to evaluate. I think we need to get more philosophy and critical thinking courses at the high school level. and on all the way up through college. Make them mandatory as a part of the curriculum. But right now, that's what you do. You get familiar with the tools yourselves and then mentor the student in those tools, i.e. philosophy, critical thinking, logic, philosophy, science, and things like this. Sort of a generic thing. I can point to examples all day long, and that's good, but you have to have the process in evaluating that information to turn it into knowledge. Again, knowledge results from the epistemological application to information, turning it into knowledge. How do you know, in other words?
Okay. Another question that we have is what role, if any, has the availability of data and the improvements in IT boosted online publishing in this problem?
What was that? So what role that data has in online publishing?
Big data, and then the improvements in technology and IT.
Well, again, it just follows the same process. I think having the data itself is basically a result of a measurement of something, and again, how you measure that. Getting in statistics and that area, I'm not quite sure of the question, but then, okay, what is statistics? Statistics is a form of inductive reasoning. What is good inductive reasoning? I know I'm getting more general, more abstract, but it comes from that. In terms of how this interacts in our IT world, again, I think sort of a funneling of all these various aspects into this quality institute would be good. I've had a lot of experience in the past in information technology in its quality. Information technology itself and how you manage it follows the same kinds of processes, testing. Again, all has to do with the quality. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but I didn't quite hear all of it. Anyway, does that answer that question?
And just to let everyone know, we're just going to go ahead and just take one more question. But as I said earlier, the full presentation and the recording of the webinar will be made available. And then also at the end of this presentation, my email address and Dr. Horne's email address will be listed, so we can continue the conversation here for these, because I'm seeing a lot of great questions come in. For the last question, Dr. Horne, we have someone who said, we recently had a faculty and an administration publish in a predatory journal and leading predatory conferences over the many years. When this was brought forward to the Dean of Research, no actions were taken. What are your thoughts on this situation? And what do you recommend?
All right. Yeah, that's I love to talk about hours on this, and I know I run into several situations like that myself, and it's really tricky. Let's say that there is a predatory journal. Let's say it was on Beale's list or whoever's list, and it was kind of deemed predatory, and most of the stuff in that journal is junk. But you see a good article appearing in that journal. See, this is the trick. Part of the trick. So the university may have looked at the article and say, that's really great, even though it's in the field in a garbage dump. I guess people throw out diamond watches sometimes, and they appear in garbage dumps. Use that analogy. I'm looking at an example here, very good example, I think, of the FQXI forum. This is run by a number of prominent physicists, a number of Nobel laureates, and I submitted an essay, got accepted, got it published, and then the comments came back. One from an individual also put an essay on FQXI, and you look at his research and everything, and I looked at the research, and you go to the predatory journal. Well, I don't know who this guy is. This guy may be a Nobel laureate himself, for all I know. And this gets into a very, very interesting area about the borderlands of science. How can a reputable scholar get onto those borderlands? You have several emerging issues here. The journal itself, which is a garbage dump, the article itself may be good, bad, or indifferent. And then you have the question of reputation of the person. Then the university doesn't know how to look at the journal. Again, I'm going to be pounding the table with this Knowledge Quality Institute. If we had an institute like that, they could look at this journal, and you had a whole panel, several panels of looking at the journal itself. And I know there are problems with this, but you have to have some way of, or put it this way, there's too much anarchy out there. Everybody's trying to scramble for their own solutions. Some of the solutions are good, some of them are bad. But what do you do with a lot of people out there crying for help out there? I do think something needs to be done. It's a very legitimate question. What do you do about the university? You can go to the dean of the university, I suppose, or whoever is responsible for making the decision, and make an appointment, sit down with them, and say, here's the journal. Look at the public. Look at the online publication within just a few days. Look at all the other things. Why do you think it's predatory? Explain to that individual why you think it's predatory. Well, you see, there are hundreds, thousands of examples like this, and there's no coordinating apparatus. There's no organization who people could go to for help. There are a lot of people out there crying for help. Yeah, that's a bloody good question. I agree. But I'll be more than happy to give personal responses by email. I think we really need to get this process going.
Okay, so that's just going to conclude the Q&A portion of this webinar. I'd like to thank everyone, and then also for Dr. Horne for the wonderful discussion. I'm seeing a lot of great questions come in, and we will be sure to reach out to the people who questions did not get answered personally. I would also like to mention—
I really want to thank you too, Caroline. I really want to thank you, Caroline, and IGI for this opportunity. I really appreciate this very much.
And you're more than welcome. And I would also like to mention that a full write-up around this presentation and delving a little bit more into the information scientist part of it is actually featured in Against the Grain and IGI Global's recurring column, Optimizing Library Services, and it will be released in their April issue. So be sure to read that. Also, for additional information on this topic, we have a few related publications for you: Enhancing Academic Research with Knowledge Management Principles, Scholarly Publishing and Research Methods, Scholarly Communication, and the Publish or Perish Pressures of Academia, once again providing peer-reviewed quality knowledge on this topic. Also, I'd like to point to Dr. Horne's publication. Obviously, he did talk a lot about logic, but he is the editor of the Philosophical Perceptions on Logic and Order, and everyone who has attended this webinar will receive a 40% discount on this publication and also all of the recommended publications, and an email, a follow-up email will be sent out after that on how to access this 40% discount, so be sure to check your inboxes. This and all of the recommended publications and Dr. Horne's research is all a part of IGI Global's InfoSci database collection. And this includes InfoSci Books, a collection of 4,500 books containing over 86,000 chapters, InfoSci Journals, a collection of 175 journals with over 22,000 articles and 1 million citation references. And we also offer specialized subject and discipline-focused databases. We actually unveiled new pricing for all of our databases, and as a part of this new pricing, IGI Global is offering InfoSci Journals for an annual subscription price for as low as $4,950 for new customers. And something that's neat with this offer is with all of the IGI Global journals being hybrid open access, all institutions who invest in this database will have their IGI Global open access fees waived. So this will provide an affordable way for researchers to publish their research open access. Once again, it will go through a double blind peer review process, as Dr. Horne did mention, but please note that the research must be vetted and accepted into an IGI Global journal before the fee is waived. So for the researchers, be sure to recommend this database for your librarian, and especially take advantage of the InfoSci Journals offer. And then for our librarian listeners, as I know we have a few, please contact eResources at igiglobal.com for pricing. Additionally, for our librarian listeners, we recently unveiled a new library account program. So when librarians sign up for a IGI Global library account, they'll receive an automatic 25% discount on all purchases. And it includes exclusive benefits, including count of 4, mark records, flexible purchasing options. And this is just to make sure that you and institutions are getting in quality research with budget cuts. Okay, and I just wanted to thank everybody once again for their time. And for more information about IGI Global, our peer review process, and also our membership with COPE, please visit www.igiglobal.com to also learn more about our Publish Publishing opportunities, we are looking for new project proposals in our 11 subject areas. Go to www.igiglobal.com/publish. And then thank you very much one more time for joining us. And as I said earlier, our presentation has been recorded, and everyone will be sent a recording and the presentation to all attendees. And then once again, you will get the 40% discount for the recommended publications and Dr. Horne's publication. So be sure to check your inboxes. I will hopefully you will join us for upcoming webinars. And for any questions, whether for Dr. Horne about our peer review process or IGI Global, please feel free to contact me at communications@igiglobal.com. So thank you once again for joining us, and to you, Dr. Horne, for taking the time to walk us through this. So I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Take care, everybody. I appreciate it.